Today we're going to take a look at Rapala lures. And for those who don't speak Midwestern Chicagoese, Rapala, because we have to mispronounce everything. We're going to take a look and see how we got from here in meager beginnings to here. A company celebrating over 215 years in business. It began very meagerly in a Finnish village. Lauri Rapala began in 1905. It was in the 1930s that he worked as a lumberjack and a farmhand to feed his family, but he had a true passion for fishing, and he thought of an idea to hand make his own lures. In 1936, in order to cut time and costs of rebaiting hooks, he began to make cork minnows wrapped in tinfoil. He would then seal them after using the wrappers from cheese crackers and candies to make his minnows shine. The anniversary models are certainly those that pay tribute to what it is that Lauri Rapala was trying to accomplish. The original lure that casts today, black on top, gold on the bottom, with the white belly, mimics the action of the wounded minnow. The lure drastically increased the catch of trout and pike. He began to switch from cork to pine bark for the lure body. His endeavors were interrupted when he was called off to war for 6 years by the invaders from the east and found himself fighting first the Soviets first, then Germany. Back home in 1945, found Lauri Rapala's new audience. That audience would be vacationers to Lake Poyani, and they were eager to buy his lures. A family business emerged. Rapala's 4 sons, Risto, Enzio, Esco, and Kauko, helped with production, and wife Elma handled the packaging of the baits and the bookwork. Gradually, the men mechanized the production process with an old spinning wheel that was adapted into a sander and circular saw. A stickler for accuracy, Lauri tested the action on the first 1,000 lures in a water tank or the lake, whichever he needed. In the 1950s, they made their way to the States. In 1952, with the Helsinki Summer Olympics, participants bought them from a local shopkeeper and took them home. And these lures, as they found their way back home, they were also brought by Finns who had immigrated to the U.S. that had brought them with them. In the 1960s, there was a breakthrough. Ron Weber, a Minneapolis-based tackle sales rep, had heard rumors of a prolific Finlander plug. And as an avid angler, he was eager to try one. And during a particularly frustrating Canadian fishing trip in the summer of 1959, Weber's fishing partners pulled out an unfamiliar lure and tied it on his line. Suddenly, where there were no fish, there were now plenty, and he had to know why. On his way back home to Minneapolis, Weber stopped in Duluth, which was both his hometown but also home to numerous Finnish immigrants. The Finnish owner of an outdoor clothing store had some Rapalas behind his counter and sold Weber a few. And after trying them out himself, Weber wrote Lauri Rapala and asked for 500 pieces. Rapala first had to have the letter translated into his native Finnan, and then next he sought help from Helsinki's Foreign Trade Department on how to proceed. In the early 1960s, Weber received his first order. As the Rapalas attended to matters of their own on their home soil, Weber convinced his friends and sporting goods store owner Ray Ostrom to help him distribute the lures. Initially named the Rapala Company, the part-time business operated out of Ostrom's store. The men renamed the company Nordic Enterprises before settling on what we know today as Normark or Northland in 1965. Weber and Ostrom then tested the market for the lures in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and initially the sales were slow. The initial offering price tag of $1.95 was an expensive treasure, as the Johnson Silver Minnow and Jitterbugs were selling at that time in Lazy Ike's for roughly $1. But with the ever-changing tackle market, early Normark sales rep Bill Cullerton Sr. was quoted as saying, crafting a legend, the timing was perfect. With the monoline and lighter fishing tackle coming out, the industry needed lighter lures, and sales began to pick up. And as we can see on the back of some of these packages, it even tells you specifically to tie on between 4 and 14-pound monofilament with the snap, or tie it directly. And if the front nose gets bent, just take your pliers and bend it back to correct the action. And even the early lures that were sent were still inspected and hand tested by the ever-vigilant Lori Rapala. Normark was now armed with an exclusive North American distribution contract from Rapala, and they looked towards the news media to spread the word of the new lures. During the 1960s, word traveled, and Ostrom cultivated relationships with local and national sports and outdoor retailers. The company also funded fishing films targeting sportsman shows and fishing clubs. The company's greatest exposure was generated by a 1962 Life magazine article titled The Original Finnish Minnow. It was at that time competition was stiff, with retailers coming on the market and bringing less expensive but similar looking plastic baits compared to Rapala's hand-tuned wooden beauties. Even as the prices went up a bit during the 1960s and into the 70s, Rapala's lures began an ascent to the top, bringing them to 1965 when Normark was named the Importer of the Year by the National Trade Magazine Sporting Goods Dealers. When it seemed like the competition in the market was shifting from the old wooden style plugs to the less expensive and sometimes altered action of plastics, Rapala stayed true to the course. In the 1970s, the Normark Company purchased the company we now know as Blue Fox Lures. They incorporated some of the plugs and spinners that complemented the Rapala lineup well. In the 1980s, with flat sales and diminished demand due to a global recession, Rapala decided to take a project on that had unfortunately been shelved in 1974 due to the death of Lori Rapala. And with that, in the 70s and 80s, we saw the advent of different styles and colors that brought about the jointed minnow, the different flashes, but the true product that they were going after for Laurie Rapala and to fulfill his dream, we know today is the Shad Rap. Touted with the picture of Laurie Rapala on the back and the words hand-tuned and tank-tested, Rapala again began to take control over the market. Their diligence paid off. And another fine example of a crankbait made from balsa wood, lightweight, that mimicked the action of bait fish. Other styles and colors would come out, and we would see crawdad, the original black and silver, the black and gold, the bait fish, bluegill, the original blue and white. But then we would see the fat wrap, as that crawdad featured one. And they would bring back some old legends, paying tribute to Laurie's design of the foil wrapper from cheese and cracker packages and candy. They would come out with some of the finest suspending crankbaits, known as the Husky Jerk. But it was also before that time period in the 1970s when we saw the introduction of what we know today as the sinking countdown minnow. They added to the floating lineup of the original and added this countdown minnow that for every second you counted it down, you could expect 1 foot of depth in sinking for the lure. In the 1980s and early 90s, with the birth of the Husky Jerk, they had merged the two with the incredible finish that we come to expect, but a lure that would suspend it and stay in place when you stopped cranking it and stopped retrieving it, thus agitating the fish to bite the lure. Later on, we would see a tribute paying homage to the Rapala sons, the same ones who had stayed true to see their father's idea and dream of the Shad Rap come to life in the Risto Rap, named after one of the Rapala brothers. Although the company has changed locations of where they manufacture the lures, they've been made in Finland, Ireland, and currently many are made in Estonia. The company stays true to its model, true to its roots, producing some of the finest crankbaits and jerkbaits that a fisherman could ever want or love. So that's how we got from the meager beginnings, from the high price of the $1.95 retail to over 115 years of fine fishing lures.